And then we'll cover some early anvil styles here. And the first style of anvil was a block iron. And as time went by, blacksmiths added more and more surface to work on. And this is the earliest dated anvil that we know of. There could be other ones that are dated, but we don't know of any. And this was dated 1533. We have some older anvils than the one pictured here, but they just aren't dated.
Where was that found? Where was that
I believe this was found over in Europe somewhere, probably in Germany or somewhere in Europe. Most anvils that are in this style are from Europe, and there's not too many anvils over here compared to England and Europe, since we don't have a whole lot of history over here compared to England. They go back to thousands of years old compared to when did we come over here in the 1400s?
400 years.
So we've only been here 600 years compared to thousands of years. And then here's some catalogs of the different styles of anvils. I'll be only covering a few styles, probably about 5 to 10 different styles, but these are a whole bunch of different style anvils. So we'll first cover the colonial anvil here. The key features are this 5th foot here usually sticks out on the anvil, and these are usually hornless. So this anvil here, since it does not have a horn, would be a lot older than the anvil here that does have a horn. And then these were made pre-1830s, since they were in the colonial style, and they don't have a table, which is the table right here, and the drop down here right before it gets to the horn. And they're usually blocky as well, and they're usually made out of 1 or 2 pieces of metal. And then these were typically made in England and then shipped to America in the bottom of the ships for ballast. And back in the 1700s, they just ship it over here to the United States. And then a common manufacturer would be Mousehole Forge. They made a lot of these 5th foot anvils and then the colonial style anvils here. And then the London pattern or English style anvil, the key features are they have a single horn up here, and then they have a hardy hole, which is the rear of the anvil, which would be right here. And then they would have a pritchel hole, which is right in the rear, right behind the hardy hole here. And then they first appeared in England in the early 1700s. That's right after the colonial style anvils were made. And then this is one of the most common style of anvils made, and there's millions of them in the world, and it's hard to believe, but there's probably a few 100,000 here in Pennsylvania. And then most of the anvils had a tool steel face and then a wrought iron body due to the tool steel being more expensive. We discussed that a little bit earlier. So this anvil here is a hay button anvil. So it's very hard to see, but there's a tool steel face here on anvils. And then common manufacturers are hay button, Fisher. Hay button is made in New York, Fisher made in Trenton, New Jersey. Peter Wright is made in Sheffield, England, as well as Mousehole is made in Sheffield, England. And then one of the most first major producers of anvils was Mousehole Forge in Sheffield, England. They started making them around 1628, and they ended around 1933. So that was right between World War I and World War II. And then the North German style anvil, which would be this anvil here. Key features are a double horn here, so it's a tapered horn from a thicker piece of metal to a thinner, and that has a hardy hole up front by the horn, and then a pritchel hole in the back here, and then upsetting block, which is right down here. So upsetting block, that's basically just to push in the different pieces of metal. So if this anvil was a lot larger, then what I would do, upsetting block on this anvil here, so if this was pretty high, it would be hard to hammer a piece of metal up here. So that upsetting block lowers the surface of the anvil down below here. It would be almost knee height then. And then I can hammer down top of it, and it mushrooms the bottom piece of metal here almost like a bolts. And then they started making anvils back in 1783. And they're still in business nowadays. They still make brand new anvils I think they're around $10 to $12 a pound. So a 100-pound anvil would be around $1,000 to $1,200. And then common manufacturers are a ruffling house, which is one pictured here, and then a petting house anvil is pictured right here. And this is the one I own as well as the one here. And this is the different parts of the North German style anvil. So these would all be forge welded or fused together in a hot furnace. So it's really hard to imagine how hot that fire would be. And it would be a large fire, probably about the size of this table here, and then just heating up that anvil. So it's hard to imagine how much heat would radiate off the anvil. So they would start with the center block here, and that would be probably, if it was a 100-pound anvil, that would probably be about 50 to 60 pounds, so about half the weight of the anvil. And then they would forge weld on the two horns of the anvil here, and then they would forge weld on or heat and fuse the feet here next. And then usually, if they had a side shelf, not all anvils have a side shelf. These are for making scrolls or curved pieces of metal that can tuck underneath the side shelf here. And this is typically a North German style up or side shelf. And then they would also do an upsetting block like I have down here. And then last but not least, they would have a tool steel plates up top here. And for the Raffling House anvils, these were made out of 01 tool steel. And they would be around 4 to 5 inches wide. And then they would have their hardy hole up here and then Pritchell hole back here that would be punched last. The Bavarian, one of my favorite style anvils, or the South German style, they have a sloped brow. So this is the Bavarian style right up here. This is made in 1900 by Sodding and Halbach. And they usually have a stepped foot, which is right down here on the anvil. And then these anvils rarely had a Pritchell hole, the round hole in the anvil, similar to this. The reason why we have a brow on the anvil is that as you're hammering a piece of metal like this, usually on a typical anvil, if you miss a hit, it's going to chip the edge of the anvil here. But on a Bavarian style anvil, if you have a piece of metal here, it's going to hammer here and kind of just glance off or move to the brow of the anvil here to kind of slide down. So most Bavarian style anvils didn't chip up here by the brow, but they chipped on the other side of the anvil here. So if they had a striker and they missed, it would just go off the side here. And as well as they didn't bow. So usually on a typical anvil, if you're using it a lot, it'll bow, which means it kind of curves downwards as you're hammering it and compresses downwards. So on these anvils, since they have a lot of mass up here, it wouldn't bow as much. And then the brow was first used in the medieval times to make sheet metal armor, and then also helps the anvil not chip. So what they would do is they would move the anvil down like this and set it down and use the curves here, the two curves, to make sheet metal armor. You can kind of imagine the size, almost like a cuff or something like that, for armor. And then common manufacturers are Sodding Halbach and Holthaus. I don't know of any manufacturers over in Europe that make this style anvils, but I'm one of the few anvil manufacturers that does make a Bavarian style anvil. And then the Italian anvil, they have 4 feet, kind of looks like an M here. They have a double horn, a Pritchell hole, and a hardy hole in the back. So this is the Italian style anvil here. It kind of looks like an M here with the feet. And then this style had a wider face than most anvils in their weight class. So as you can see, this anvil is about 28 pounds. This anvil is approximately 30, 35 pounds. So if there was an anvil that was 100 pounds in their both weight classes, the piggy anvils, these would have about a 6-inch wide face compared to a London pattern anvil like this that would have about a 4-inch wide face. So they're going to be a little bit wider, a little bit chunkier style anvil, a little bit shorter as well. And then the common manufacturers are Unslato Ironworks over there in Italy. I think they were out of business back in the 1920s.
Why do they call it a pig anvil?
Because they look like a picked because they're short and stout and have 4 feet. And then the French anvil here. Key features, they do not have a picture hole, which is the round hole of the anvil here. And then they usually have 4 feet, like the one pictured here, or no feet at all. They would just be a block of metal. If they were pretty large, they would just be square at the bottom there. And then they would have a hardy hole. You can see the picture here. It would come in, for example, this anvil here, it would have a hardy hole off to the side here. And then they would have a hardy hole going through the side of the anvil here. And I am not sure why they did that. It was just their style of anvils at the time. I guess they figured that it would be a little bit better design, but it seemed to go out of style. And then these are also known as a pig anvil as well, due to their short stature and 4 feet as well. And then common manufacturers are Claude de Nicolas and Claudian Anvil. And then we have the Belgian anvil here. They usually have a hardy hole on the front side of the anvil, like the French anvils do. And then they were also known to produce anvils starting in the mid-1800s. For some reason, they didn't have a lot of iron in the area, so they started producing anvils back in the 1800s. And then most anvils in this style were cast out of tool steel. And at this time, they were able to figure out how to cast good quality anvils. And then common manufacturer are the UAT ironworks, which is this anvil here. And then we have a Chinese anvil. These are really interesting anvils. I was talking to a few Chinese people over the last few weeks getting information on their anvils. These are called turtle anvils or bread loaf anvils because you can kind of see that they have a curved shape to them. And these range from 50 pounds all the way up to about 100-pound size, and depending on the style. And they usually do not have a hardy hole. This one does. This one would go all the way through. And most were cast from tool steel or cast iron. So at this, most anvils were made out of cast iron from the Chinese, and they weren't too good of quality anvils. It's hard to compete with good English anvils that are good quality. And then Chinese anvils, from what I've seen, are usually porous, which means they have a lot of pock marks in them. And for some reason, they didn't decide to improve their anvils. And then you can kind of see the horns here. These actually slide out, so they're very removable. Just like the hardy here, they would have a square hole or a round hole here, and you can just pull out the horns. So that was kind of interesting for these. And they're pretty much portable anvils as well. So you can take them around to different places. And then we have the Austrian style anvil. Key features are they do not have a pritchel hole that we know of. And then hardy hole by the heel, right up back here. And then stepped feet, kind of stepped feet here. And then church windows, these 2 arches there. And then most Austrian style anvils were cast between 1860s and 1920s. For some reason, they didn't forge many of them. They were just casting them. And then common manufacturers are JEB or John Elias Brooks, made in Austria. And then here we have a coachmaker's anvil. The side shelf right here is used to make brackets for carriages that were held the leaf springs together. So these are somewhat uncommon anvils here in the United States. Most of them were from England and other European countries. So for some reason they didn't make many of these in the United States. These originated back in the 1700s. And then we have a farrier's anvil here. These are used for shoeing horses. You can see the slide clip here. So it's just like a London pattern anvil, all the key features here. But it usually typically does have 2 pritchel holes because they're punching the holes in the horseshoes. And then what makes a farrier's pattern is this clip here for drawing out the clips, the tops of the horse's shoes to keep them in place. And then these were not made until the mid-1900s, typically made here in the United States. And then we have a saw maker's anvil. These are used for setting the teeth on saws. So they usually have a tool steel plate up here, and then they were flat up at the top. This is a Fisher anvil made in 1920s, 1924 I believe, and it's still in very good condition today. And then these anvils range from about 25 pounds, so they're portable, all the way up to 800 pounds if they're working in a large factory or shop. And then these anvils are typically harder than a typical anvil face because if they're hammering on a sawtooth are very hard. So they're made out 15 N20, which is a tool steel. So that N20, that's nickel in it. So it's going to be a lot harder than some anvil faces. So they had to have a Rockwell around 62, which is a lot harder than the anvils up here. So if you're hammering on a sawtooth, on a typical anvil, it might dent the face or the tops of the anvils.
So if you were a blacksmith and you were making all these various tools and objects, you needed all these different anvils?
No, typically they would just use one. In my shop, I use 3 of them. So I have a wide face anvil, a Fisher anvil, so it has about 6-inch wide face for making leaves, and that's basically like a bench anvil where I can put pretty much anything on top of the anvil, it would just rest there. It's 400 pounds. So it won't move anymore. And then I have a Raffling House anvil back there, the double horn anvil. It's really nice to have a horn here. So if I have a staple, can you imagine a staple? So if I have a staple on a horn or an anvil like this, I'm trying to bend it flat, you can't get the heel of the anvil. You can't set it over the top of the heel. So a double horn, you can just slide it over top here. It would go to the width that you're trying to get. So the double horns are really nice to use. And then I also use a 45-pound anvil that I make a little bit larger than this. That's a really sharp horn. So if I'm doing something intricate, then I have a small horn or small anvil to make them. So I pretty much just use 3 anvils, actually 4 anvils, 1 to take to demonstrations. But a typical anvil, you just need 1 for a blacksmith shop. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of different styles. I was just covering the different styles of anvils across the world. But most blacksmiths, they would just stick to one or 2 anvils. Then an average size for a blacksmith shop would be about 150 to 200 pound anvils, because they would have about 4.5-inch wide face, which is about this wide here, and then they could pretty much do anything that you could do on a 400 or 500 pound anvil.